380,000 people. Only 380,000 people came through the slave trade, maximum 500,000, to the United States, where foreigners could access the American dream and succeed in one generation, while for the Afro-descendants, life in America was more of a nightmare. Generation after generation not able to secure their dream for true liberation and self-determination. It was these discrepancies born of living in many cities and states across America and seeing the same pattern of poverty and governmental neglect that caused African Development Plan to take a more inward look to see how similar our experiences were and how tied it was to our shared our period of great suffering, which we have been under since 1452 and the signing of the Papal Bull. The history of slavery, colonialism, and now neocolonialism, and the racist discrimination and white supremacy that we're subject to globally as African people, and how these systems left the world with a poor concept of what they thought being an African meant. The issue of the African descendant in America became more important to me as our status here impacted America's terroristic policies towards people of African descent globally. We are over 42 million people who are still colonized and must be self-determined. We and the world must insist that the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR Article 1, be adhered to. All people have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. The US ratified the ICCPR in 1992. Upon ratification, the ICCPR became the supreme law of the land under the Supremacy Clause of the US Constitution, which gives ratified treaties the status of federal law. Why has it not been implemented? This inability to keep our need for decolonization, to see our need for decolonization is further exacerbated by our living in America, a country bent on forcing its social construct of race on us, where Blacks were led to be property that served whites, and whites were to be the only beneficiaries of the new country they created from our stolen land and labor. This thought pattern exists globally, where Western elites have been allowed to pretend that they have the right to establish international norms and rules through what Edward Schill describes as the concept of center and periphery, where all the major institutions that are created by the elite set the rules, have the power, and where you are in that structure depends on how much or how little power you have. Since we are a marginalized group, we have very little power in that structure. We of the Black race, though acknowledge the cradle of civilization, are in a constant struggle with Western thought, which insists on marginalizing us and pretending through academia that we have made no contribution and that its Eurocentric thought is the only thought to be heard. What is it that facilitates this mindset that has allowed that Eurocentric group of less than 10%, people forget, 10% of the world's population to dominate the world's thought till now? I say it's the Trojan horse we call Western style education and academia, which is used as a standard globally. They are elitist and created systems through curriculum which reinforce their worldview and dehumanize those of the Black race. It is also clear that the Catholic Church, through its papal bull, set the stage for domination and slavery. This memory is important because this was the beginning of the 500-plus-year war launched against Africans and other indigenous people of the Americas and world, and created these structures we are here to talk about today. This war never officially ended. The role of the church was critical in colonization, and its legacy cemented these dehumanizing anti-African, anti-Black attitudes amongst the people of the world, and the remnants of this way of thinking form the baseline for all attitudes and actions towards us as people till today. Through miseducation, it has become instinctual for most people to fear and or hate Black people. Even Black people hate themselves, as evidenced by the use of skin bleachers to look more white, their assimilation into Western culture and values in their behavior and ways, in our struggle to be united. Why? Edward Schill defines the relevance of color as differences in pigmentation symbolizes differences between present wealth and power and present poverty and weakness, between present eminence and intellectual creativity and present intellectual unproductiveness. It is correlated with past events, above all with past events of humiliation, injury, and insult. Color is the shorthand that evokes all of these grievances. We must remember that what has happened to us is a war strategy, laid out in a quote attributed to Lord Macaulay, Minute on Education on 2nd of February, 1835. He was addressing India and what was needed there for education, but this applies to all colonized people. His speech promoted the superiority of Western education and mocked the native education and teachings. It spelled out his opinion of the folly of teaching Sanskrit and Arabic and stating, It would be manifestly absurd to educate the rising generation with a view of a state of things which we mean to alter, right? So they had to get rid of your local ways of being and culture and ways of educating because their intent was to alter this before you reach manhood. So this statement is critical to understanding their intent. In that document, he consistently mocks the value of native culture and dialects and notes that it's impossible for us with our limited means to attempt to educate the body of the people. We must at present do our attempt to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons, he said Indian, but you can swap the word and put African, in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. To that class, we must leave it to refine the vernacular dialects of the country, to enrich these dialects with terms of science borrowed from the Western nomenclature, and to render them by degrees fit vehicles for conveying knowledge to the great mass of the population. So that middle class, that elite class, that gatekeeper class was created. This became the standard operating procedure for colonial education implementation. And we see the class of people it has created who many times become our gatekeepers, more British than the British. This is how human psychology in the colonies was programmed. Education was an imperial weapon for domination. It tells us how colonial education achieved its goals. According to Joel Spring, early educational policies implemented by Europeans tend to think of all Native Americans and Africans as other and significantly different from themselves in basic human qualities. They would label them uncivilized savages and pagans. Using these descriptions, the invader turned cultural differences into racial differences and then considered the African as racially inferior. Bartholomew de las Casas stated, in the practice of propaganda, the tactic of projection consists of accusing others of the misdeeds you yourself are committing. Projection works specifically well when you attack a people or person or group that is always already disliked, feared, misunderstood, or unprotected. And that's what we will do. So the global white media reinforces the negative images, and the education given universally reinforces this low regard for people of African descent, sometimes more pronounced in the absence of information of Black people on Africa, on our culture, or numerous contributions. Why would I have learned of John Glenn, the astronaut, but not Katherine Goebel Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, the three African-American mathematicians who worked for NASA and helped get the US into space? Why did it take 50 years to learn this? Because it didn't match the lie that we were non-productive, non-contributors to the success of this nation. And when we look today, that is what we see. People broken who have low self-esteem, who have lost their native culture, language, and ways of being, and assimilated into a European mindset that is destroying them. This has been our inheritance this last 500 years since meeting the European. Ethnocide, genocide, and structural racism. We, as African scholar activists, must insist that our education is reflective of our true history, our culture and values, and grounded in the concept of self-determination. We must insist that the ICCPR Article 1 be adhered to. All people have a right to self-determination. As defined in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26 and 27, which focuses on our right to an education and cultural life. These must both be reflective of who we are as African people. I am working to create a more equitable world for people of African descent by focusing on calling for and creating a global African curriculum. As a woman, man thinketh, so he, she is. We as scholars must acknowledge that African descendants' right to an education that reflects our true history long before slavery and is responsive to our needs for development is a first step in the restoration of a people to their rightful place on the world stage. We are responsible for creating that education that restores our culture to our people and addresses the development we need. Thank you.
Amazing, Cecile. Thank you. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions and feedback about your presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're going to move to Vickie Casanova-Willis and her thoughts on the right to education and culture. Vickie?
Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone again who's joining. I know several folks have joined since Dr. Pam started this meeting, and Justina, thank you so much for your help. You know, the next generation is why we do what we do. So I'm overjoyed both in this conversation linking back to the ancestors And I'm going to actually say coincidentally and serendipitously to our sister ancestors and next generation, but not to exclude our brothers, right? In the recognition and honoring that you gave for our sister Tina. I wanted to just mention a couple of quick things. As we head into, and again, this isn't official, on the OHCHR, there's so many acronyms in this human rights work, right? The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, on their website, the page for the PFPAD, Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, for which there is a session upcoming, the second session. It just launched in December. So very quickly, part 2 is happening, not in Geneva this time, in New York City at the UN. One thing that people are finding is that it's a little bit tougher to get into the UN right up the street than it is to get all the way over to Geneva, Switzerland. And a lot of that has to do with the things, many of the things that were just not alluded to, but very clearly articulated by our sister master researcher and scholar and teacher, human rights educator, and enforcer, Sister Cecile, which is that human rights in this country in particular, but honestly in all of the colonizing countries and nations, which comprise the United Nations, right? Human rights was aspirational even for those folks that sat down at the end of the Second World War in the late 1940s and said, okay, we no longer can just be governed by what's happening in our borders and saying the rest of that is up to them, because we see, no, it can affect all of us. So, however, I'm going to highlight that those 2 articles from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I'm just going to hold up one little book version of it. You can produce your own. These are published, they're free. There are 30 rights. That's what people call the UDHR. 30 specific internationally recognized rights, but they apply right here at home, in your sorority, your fraternity, your church, on your block, in your school, you name it, in your corporation, in your nonprofit, in your grassroots organizing, on the street for our brothers, sisters, and differently abled folks, even behind the wall, where a vast majority of people of African ancestry, especially here in this country, are still captive, right? Enslaved, actually, in the state and national constitutions. Slavery is legal in the US, and many people, people are stunned when you say that. Well, first they push back and they're angry. I'm seeing Dr. Velva Bowles nod there. She's speaking to us, incredible physician, professor, trainer, educator, advocate, activist from Louisiana, which just in the last year struck down the push to remove the slavery clause from that state constitution. We know that Angola prison is on the same footprint as the former Angola plantation. And if you all know about the Angola 3, some of whom were here in Chicago, where I am right now, after finally being freed as political prisoners, because they were doing the very work that some of us are doing right now as young people, as Panthers back in the 60s, and 40 some years on solitary confinement, 40 some years. So I just want to say this, the reason that we do this work and what the right to culture and the right to education means to me is in part helping ensure that people understand this best kept secret, that it is indeed right, as Cecile said earlier, that the US, as one of those actually initiators back when the UN was founded, and this Universal Declaration of Human Rights with these 30 articles or rights. This is the 75th anniversary year of that. 75 years ago, they weren't thinking about people that look like you and me standing up and saying, well, I'm reading this and this applies to us and this. and this are not happening, and here's what must happen. Our ancestors tried that, and you may look for a book from a sister called Carol Anderson that's called Eyes Off the Prize. We're not new to this. Many people know Brother Malcolm, lost his life, right? Or it was taken from him because he said, this is a human issue. It's not a civil issue. We're going to take this to the international arena. Well, before him, he learned that from his predecessors, both Paul Robeson as well as Esme, his wife and others, took this quote unquote Negro question of lynching in particular, right, to the court of international opinion. And the NAACP at that time was told by one of their most prominent board members, Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the president, oh, no, you are not going to embarrass us on the international stage during the middle of this Cold War. So they had to take their eyes off the prize. And it is up to our generation and the next generations to carry forth that work and that legacy. So I was going to try to reserve some of my time because I know some of our time, I'll say that, because many of the people that are here could very easily be, panelists, discussants, what have you. And I know that you, Dr. Pam, had wanted to just open the door and create a conversation. And I want to thank you that you were open also to even broadening that conversation. We have to know what the UN documents say, not because the UN is going to do anything for us, but because these are tools in our toolkit that too many people literally gave their lives for.
Right.
Us to be able to have something stronger that we could work with, and we're supposed to carry that baton a little bit further, right?
That's right.
So,
That's right.
So
Yeah.
on the 30th of May through the June 2nd in New York City, the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent is convening. For people who have not registered to be there and gone through the whole thing of, oh, you got to get certified and blah, 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 that's fine. You can watch it online, streamed through Web TV. UN Web TV. So we're going to ensure that people, just that this is not happening quietly, and coming out of this particular forum, which we had to fight for after 20 years of it being promised in part at the World Conference on Racism, Durban, which was the third World Conference. It wasn't even the first in 2001, when our people did win a measure of justice in having the transatlantic slave, and I'm going to call it trafficking, it wasn't trade, declared a crime against humanity, and that always should have been such. So in part, that gives legal standing for this resolution of reparation, which is not just money, it's not just 40 acres and a mule. There were several specific promises, one of which is a guarantee of non-repetition. So all of the structural and systemic racism, the denial of the right to culture, the denial of the right to education that fulfills the full dignity of everyone, which means no more tax on critical race theory, no more tracking and limiting Black scholarship and all of that. And not just Black scholarship, right? It shouldn't be fighting words. It lifts for everybody. So that's it for me, and I look forward to hearing from everyone. Thank you, Dr. Rhodes. So many, we got a who's who in the room this evening, and I thank you all again for the work that you do and for being willing to help continue building together. Take good care.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vickie. And just to follow up on that, the Permanent Forum main session is May 29th until June 3rd, or is it May 30th until June 3rd? And then this week we have a series of side events. And then the week after that, there's a series of side events. So this session is an official session on the United Nations Permanent Forum schedule. So a couple of things I just want to touch on that Dr. Vickie said, and that is, first of all, Black Doctorates Matter is, okay, the term itself suggests that there's a focus on the doctorate, right? So from my experience, my research was really about figuring out my own journey as a doctoral student in the Ivy League. Let me tell you, I had no idea what I had walked into. I was inspired and encouraged by my late aunt, who encouraged me to pursue my education, and I did it so fervently that I ended up at Penn in a higher education program, and absolutely loved the opportunity to pursue my degree in that way. But what I learned is that there were so many of us who had similar experiences about wanting to do research on our work and use that research to improve and enhance our communities. And we could not do that work without the partnership and collaboration of activists and advocates who are doing that work. Every single marginalized scholar that I talked to and collaborated with in graduate school and beyond was committed to doing some kind of human rights work at some level to improve their communities. Many of those folks are on this call tonight who are doing amazing work in college and university environments. They're doing work in the community, various cultural institutions. And so my work has to be about community. It has to be about bringing together the collaborative experiences so that we can get a sense of how our work speaks to each other. And what this forum has done for me is introduced me to so many folks who are interested in doing that. And so this session tonight is a manifestation of that. And I look forward to taking what we've learned here tonight and in the session, the Caribbean conference that I sat in on yesterday was absolutely amazing. I'm hoping that that information can be translated into some kind of publication where we can continually include information that speaks to our experience. One thing in particular that struck me yesterday in the Caribbean conference is the digital world and how it's growing so quickly, and the lack of representation of our communities in that space. The lack of representation of individuals who can speak to our cultural needs and experiences. And so, my work again is about attempting to bring together conversations from folks in various disciplines who need to come together with activists and advocates to push their work forward. So I'm really excited about what this forum has in store, and I hope that we can make this conversation interactive tonight and hear from other people who are doing work in their disciplines that speak to human rights. I'm going to open up the floor. I know we are waiting for Kim Dulaney from the DuSable Museum. I don't know if she's on the call. I do see a couple of iPhones and Fire tablets. So Kim, if you are on the line, please let us know, and we will make sure that you can share your perspectives. But until then, we have so many individuals I know on the call who would like to share their perspectives. So at this point, I think it would be a great idea to open up the floor to folks who would like to share some thoughts about the work that they're doing.
Hi, if you could raise your hand just down, at the bottom of the screen, lifting up the reactions, then Dr. Pam or Justina or someone could call on you.
Okay, I think Lawana's hand was first. Lawana?
I just wanted to speak briefly to the work that I'm engaged in. I'm Dr. Lawana Richmond. My focus is Afrofuturism, and I've currently have a residency with the Metaverse Architecture, Virtual Reality and Innovation Center at UC San Diego, where I'm engaged in world building activities in order to create a vision of the future that we want. My work in Afrofuturism is really centered on leveraging existing knowledge to imagine possibilities and reverse engineer the process of getting from where we are to where we would like to be, with an understanding that we have agency, we have self-efficacy, we have a history of accomplishing and achieving, and how do we instill that in people who have been denied that knowledge and been denied access to it in a way that they understand that each one of us is an architect of the future.
We need our
And so
applause
to that,
track for all of you all tonight. I'm sorry, I'm gonna mute myself.
yeah,
Thank
and
you,
so like
Luana.
yeah.
All right. Velva, I think you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. Just to answer the original question, I am an MD PhD, and my training was all through white American institutions. All my siblings were HBCU, but me. I was a breaker in my family. And the one thing in seeing this initiative is to put forth some, I guess, in the trenches kinds of questions. As a Black physician, that's the MD side, there is no established organization that backs us. That American Medical Association gives out standards of care. The National Medical Association, which is stated to be a Black organization, only parrots what they say. And why is this important? During COVID-19, my work was an advocate for those with comorbidities where the vaccine offered them no protection. And as you know, in the early stages, if you said anything except the FDA approved vaccines in the United States, you were labeled an anti-vaxxer. And I went on a number of shows. Carl Nelson is one, Winston Gilchrist, a number of New York stations, appealing to HBCUs and any Black clinical active doctors who were willing to administer the alternatives, which included ivermectin, vitamin D, zinc supplementation, based on good hard data that Black women over the age of 50, you generally had low vitamin D. I worked with the group that did that study, that those women in the younger group that eat a lot of junk food, which attribute to obesity, are usually low in zinc. And any of you on the call will know the immune system is fed by 1, vitamin D, 2, zinc, and of course, vitamin C. I won't leave that out. But there was no one, even to the point where I wrote letters to the Black Caucus in Washington, D.C. I did public appeals to the medical schools under the HBCU umbrella. I got numerous responses from independent clinical doctors, young Black men mostly, and the following comments were, we have large student loans, we cannot risk our licensure, and the people in our group have been chastised and even threatened if we are not pro-vax. And they are proselytizing or saying that ivermectin is a veterinary medicine, which is a lie. In Africa, Merck, Sharp, and Dohme have administered ivermectin for the last decade in the treatment of a myriad of diseases with good results. So my experience in the trenches is there's no fallback. As a MD, you can lose your license to practice in the state. You can be sanctioned for operating outside of standard of care. When you focus on the community, particularly Black Americans who may have diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and other comorbidities, lupus disease, for instance, MS, and on dialysis. So my biggest frustration over the last 3.5 years being in Louisiana and having had a widespread practice through all 64 parishes is I got calls from previous patients of a decade ago saying, Dr. Bowes, can you meet us at the ER? I've taken mother to the ER and they keep turning us away. So the lawyer that was speaking about human rights, I think as I was asked by the FLCCC on a Zoom call, they said, when are the Black Americans going to sue the pharmaceutical companies, Dr. Fauci and the United States for their inequitably treatment of Black people? And I froze at the question because I'd never heard it posed domestically. And this was a scientist from the FLCCC. And her evidence, as I'm very intimately aware of, consisted of something that has never been in history that I know of, and that is the medical establishment told people what your symptoms had to be. For any of you trained clinically, I'm talking nursing, CMA, any clinical training, the direction is the patient tells you the symptom. And based on your training, you fit it to a diagnosis. And based on standard of care, that diagnosis will guide you in your treatment. For COVID-19 in Black people, if you didn't have a fever and you didn't have a cough and you hadn't lost your taste, they said, go home. That can't be COVID. They didn't test you. They didn't do blood work. They did nothing. They sent them home. And I know ex-clients or children of clients I'd worked with said they took elderly and infirm people to the ER in New Orleans up to 10 times. So when they were finally admitted, they were thoroughly dehydrated because many Black people, which it was later admitted, their symptomology was different from the Chinese, different from the Italians. They had stomach complaints. Now, those of you clinically trained, that shouldn't surprise you. The biggest immune system in the human body is the small intestine Bruna glands. So why did the African-American get that particular place of target? I don't know. But they had stomach cramps, stomach pain, diarrhea, no fever, no loss of taste. And when you kept being sent home without any kind of clinical intervention, they were badly dehydrated. And any comorbidity with dehydration makes it critical. So within hours upon admission, they died, particularly if they were put immediately on a vent. Because if you remember, it was identified this as a respiratory disease that they later, gave a disclaimer because so many people were saying this is not a respiratory disease. So my comment with all of that anecdotal story is being a Black practicing physician, you are subject to penalties imposed by the oppressor. The particular health needs of the people of African descent are totally disregarded. So given symptoms that deviated from the Chinese and the Italians, said you didn't have the disease. You had to die to prove it. So I listened to this and those who are in the legal area, I really would love to see a class action suit. I know Pfizer made $60 billion within the first quarter. I don't know what the 3.5 years garnered them. But FDA has no medical authority in approving what drugs should have been okayed. And they asked that question, when did FDA supersede DEA, which is our drug enforcement agency? So it was a lot of things done that made no sense that has never been questioned. And a large number of victimized people were not only senior citizens, but predominantly Black people that were in nursing homes and anyone that had the whole bevy of comorbidities that I named. So I'm very interested in seeing how giving the historical perspective is very important. We can't do things without a memory, but I don't see how a very institutionalized, highly processing institution, because racism is not an accident. I don't think it's an attitude. It's not a belief. In America, it has action items, because ask the urology department, if you're Black and they took your urine, how they categorize your kidney condition based on whether you were Black or not. They came out with a formal apology in 2021 in JAMA. You can look it up. That's the Journal of American Medical Association, where they said, we had no scientific basis to state that a Black person lab, when it showed this, should be rated differently than if it were a white person. It was solely on what is your race? Okay. And now what's the consequences? The highest percentage of people on dialysis in the United States are Black. Why should that be a scratch your head? Well, the dialysis facilities in the US, if you didn't know, is constitutively paid for. What does that mean? The United States Senate incorporates that as a standard payment. So all they have to do is tell the US government how many are on dialysis and they get paid. If they kick you off of dialysis or you die, it's up to them to notify the government. They get constitutive pay. And I've heard, unfortunately, a number of Black people say, oh, dialysis is free. No, it's not. And the owners of all dialysis centers in the United States are 2 people. And you may have seen the sign, Free Center. Well, it's like the National Science Foundation. They receive constitutive payment of your tax dollars. So I'm saying that we can identify ourselves and we can go to their universities, but when it comes to healthcare, we have very little control or management of our people.
Well, Velva, you are the epitome of why this work is so important. So many of us find ourselves in these systems, whether they be medical systems, educational systems, where there is little to no representation and decisions being made about our experiences and about our future, our health, and they're not representative of our culture or who we are. As you were talking, I was thinking about the American Medical Association that sent out shared a report, I think it was either last week or the week before, that basically shared results about when there are Black doctors in the community, the health outcomes of Black people improve. And so you are, an example of why it's so important for us to have representation in all of these disciplines, and particularly in the medical field, so critically important. And
but the issue that frightens me, that I hope is coming across, I mean, I've been there long. I got my medical degree in 1989 from the University of Pittsburgh. I was an MD, PhD student there, the first and only of my knowledge. What is more frightening were the young doctors who sent me by email, because Carl Nelson published my email, saying, Dr. Bowles, what can I do? And then telling me how their hands were tied. Said, we can't write a prescription for ivermectin. We can't get out there and say there's alternatives to vaccination. And the most heinous thing is, here we are, 4 years later, Pfizer runs a commercial saying, if you've done all you can do, here are your alternatives. And then they mention convalescent antibodies, Regeneron, and Paxlovid. Those agents were available 4 years ago. They didn't require an FDA approval. But if you had called it out as I was, then you were an anti-vaxxer. And if you were under any kind of hospital contract, then at a potential state license, the threat was you could lose your livelihood. Something criminal is there.
You're gonna write a shadow report, I understand. It may be 1 or 2 pages, but you see Cecile Johnson, who's just a data wizard, and so many other people, right? I'm sorry for jumping in, Dr. Pam, but that is the beauty of what we are attempting to do as civil society, which means not government, basically, right? It may be organizations or it may be individuals, but in trying to educate each other, because the human rights education that is was a commitment when the UN was formed and these nations signed and ratified at least the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and a few things that they didn't read the fine print on or figured we never would. We're educating each other and working together so that a petition is signed, and or 400 organizations or names can sign on to your petition. So
that's exciting. I wrote a manifesto that addressed the COVID specifically. I made a bid to get on President Biden's COVID panel when it first opened. I petitioned the Black Caucus, but see, I've never known what group had the leverage or power, because what I pointed out was rather COVID specific, but a very non-specific indication. People shock when I tell them formularies in rural hospitals are one of the reasons many Black people, diabetes, have amputation, and why many of them go on dialysis. If you don't know what formulary is, that is a pre-decided list of medicines that can be used at a specific hospital. This is a panel decision committee, is non-doctors controlled, paid for by Medicaid. And if you are in a rural setting and a beta antibiotic is known and you write for it, you'll get mine. Dr. Bowles, you have to rewrite this prescription because it's $600 a month and this patient cannot afford it. And I would know that what was there and available could not stop the spread of this peripheral infection from becoming systemic. And I've gone to Bethesda, I've talked to NIH, I've talked to Medicaid, I've talked to Medicare, and that is what is the way it's done. So it's not just a behavior and attitude when they say racism to me, it's a policy.
Yeah. We're gonna continue this conversation, but we do have some additional hands, so we want to bring them in. I see your hand, Dr. Ansari. Did I say that correctly?
Yes,
I see
you
your
did.
hand up.
Yes, you did. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you, all of the gentleladies, for the comments and for the commentators that brought us together. Well, to introduce myself, I'm the chancellor of the only, as far as I know, Human Rights Institute by a Black person in the United States. I own the Afro-Descendant Institute of Human Rights, and I'm also the chief facilitator of a emerging nation, which is very important to our discussion here because we're talking about self-determination and remedy, especially for education. I'm the chief facilitator of the Afro-Descendant Nation Confederated. We have 127,000 members of our tribe. I'm a facilitator under international law. And the reason why, and this is my work, is because in 2001, right after Durban, when the ruling came out that the transatlantic slave war, and I noticed that my colleague Vickie called it the trafficking, transatlantic slave trafficking, both. But I use the transatlantic slave war because it's in line with the legal remedy that I'm about to present to everyone here, because there's something that we can do about all your complaints, about the educational complaint, about the COVID complaint, and it's called self-determination. It means, and it just doesn't mean the cliche of self-determination, it means the practice of self-determination. This is something that we don't know how to do. So in order to resolve the question of education, in 2016, I wrote 3 pieces that's on academia.edu regarding the discrimination in education, how to empower the HBCUs, and all of them dealt with international law and education, because education is our #1 issue in reparations, because reparations is multifaceted, it's not a check. And our #1 problem is education, our children, to make sure that they are able to operate in a society and are able to prosper in a society and be protected in society. So education is very important for us. Now, what we can do, and what has been done all over the world with intellectuals, the intellectual class, when they had an issue with a hostile government in Cuba, is a good example, but there's other examples. What happened in Cuba was that the intellectual class, this is Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and so many others, were actively involved in political change. We can actively be involved in political change as intellectuals, but we have to do it in a proper way. One of the things that we are suggesting that we do to resolve the question of education is a plebiscite, is an identity plebiscite, because in 2001, when we left Durban, when our activism scholars left Durban, where the Organization of American States, who houses the highest international court in the Western Hemisphere, and the Organization of American States gave us an identity, not gave us identity, but we all was representatives from every country, Afro-descendant from every country, that decided on the term Afro-descendant. This is not just a term, it's a status, because we need to know how to fight. The complaints that we've been having so far is because of the fact that we are virtually powerless under the simple minority structure to even fight in an international court. But as Afro-descendants, which is an indigenous category, we can bring education into our own hands. Now, as educators and as intellectuals, what we can do is support and endorse a plebiscite with education as one of the questions. All education in this country is dealt with, as you see right now, by boards and that are not our own. But indigenous people are not subject to any regulation, particularly in regards to education. So if we want to resolve education, we have to assert our Afro-descendant status by merely a declaration of declaring and asserting who we are under the law. And under this law, we are entitled to not only identity, but we're entitled to land and the authority over the land, just like any tribal member. We are a tribe. And the reason why we haven't been winning is because of the fact that we don't know how to fight. We're fighting under the civil rights laws, and civil rights laws can't end a war. And this is why I call it the transatlantic slave war. People and war remedies are different than civil rights remedies. And we've been choosing civil rights remedies, leaving it up to the Congress, leaving it up to class action lawsuits and all of these things, leaving it up to white men, basically, who are the defendants, which doesn't make any sense. And this is something that we have to intellectually get our minds around as being illogical. So in order to rectify this, we simply have to assert ourselves. The intellectuals have to understand who they are first. The laws all over the place. All you have to do is Google, Afro-descendant, and you'll see that we are entitled to this status, which means that we can that we don't have to, that the bans will not affect us. Gentrification will not affect us. All the things that COVID and any of the health concerns that were decided on by the white majority doesn't affect indigenous people. Indigenous people have higher rights. They have the rights to educate their own people, number one. So we would automatically win that in court. So we have a win, our money on the table, that we have to be able to be intelligent enough to assert our rights as Afro-descendant, which is a tribe, which is a status. Mm-hmm. Go into court. It gives us juridical status. In COBRA and other reparations groups, this is the reason why they lost. They didn't have the right to represent us. But mm-hmm. as Afro-descendant people, our lawyers now have the right to go into court and represent our people because we have given ourselves this status. Mm-hmm. Once we give ourselves the status, we give ourselves the right to go into court. Not an American court, but an international court. So that's what we can do for education, and that's what we can do for COVID. In fact, one of my first petitions in the international court was that our doctors be allowed to treat our own patients with our own remedies.
Yeah. Now, Doctor, I'm sorry, this is incredible. We have got to do a follow-up on this topic alone. I can definitely see you and Velva on a panel together, and we can get some additional commentary. And one of the things that I'm working on right now is a follow-up to this session. And what I will do is create an article on LinkedIn where I am sort of touching on all of these key points, and I will definitely quote you in the article. I see that Kim Dulaney has joined us, and since she is one of our panelists, I'm going to ask if we can have Donna and Paula share their comments after Kim shares her presentation on the right to culture. Kim, thank you so much for
I didn't
joining
have a
us.
presentation either.
Kim
I saw
Dulaney
that
representing
expression.
the DuSable Museum.
Okay. I do not have a presentation, and I thought, so you want me to talk about the right to culture, to education and culture, right?
Yes, Cecile and Vickie have done a wonderful job talking really about the right to education and culture. But I know you, as Vice President of the DuSable in the program education, I know you're doing so much culturally in our community. So please share your knowledge and your wisdom with us.
May I mention something just really quickly, if you don't mind? I'm sorry, I'm so out of process, but I'm sorry, I just am.
No, it's fine.
I just wanted to point I wanted to let you know that Pam started us off with a little musical tribute to ancestor Tina Turner. You know, thinking about the right to culture, and we referenced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and this being the 75th anniversary year, and the details around, you know, Article 26, the right to education, and Article 27 from the UDHR, the right to culture. And I remember you in 2016 being instrumental when you were at Chicago State in helping immediately say, yes, that would be a host site, and you were a professor there. It would be a host site for the first visit to the US that the US allowed, for the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. They visited 5 cities that year: New York, DC, Jackson, Mississippi, and Chicago and Baltimore. It was a summer, yet another summer, of so many families, you know, lamenting this horrible theft of the lives, of Black lives, right? And we as a group, including you and you know, several folks, determined that this would be a Chicago Midwest visit, not just a city visit. So you had 1,000 folks in your house.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's just all I wanted to say, and just have been a real asset, like a real asset and a leader for so long with regards to the human rights education, like directly in your classrooms, but also open into the community. And I just wanted to give that introduction.
Thank you, Vickie. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So listen, thank you very much for that. And she got such great details. See, I don't even remember all the pieces because I'm running so much, but thank you. So listen, the right to education and culture to me are kind of one and the same, right? Because in the African-centered understanding, it's all connected, right? So there's not like a separate education and a separate culture. They all intersect. It's all in there together. When you're learning about culture, right? When people are learning about their culture, they are being educated. We think of the world as a classroom, and everything we do is so in it. So we don't think of education as like math in a book and, you know, spelling in a book, those type of things. We definitely think of, in Black studies, we call it interdisciplinary. So it's all in there, it's all together, right? There might be areas of focus on particular things, but never is anything taught in a silo or experienced in a silo. It's all together. And so the right to education in its purest form is the right to culture. The right to culture is, in its purest form, the right to education, because that's how you learn who you are, what you should believe, how you should understand the things you encounter. All of those things are impacted by this history of culture, right? And so for me, I have had this long labored journey and trying to get into all of the spaces and search for tools that we can use on this exploration back to freedom, right? I have this company, Born Free. I have this whole understanding that we were born free. I'm 59 years old, so I come of age. I was nurtured into the Black Power movement, and I was telling somebody it took me to get to my mid-50s to understand that that's what I'm looking for, the promise that I was born into. So I was born into the Black Power movement, where Black is beautiful, Black is cool. I was born in 1964. So Black is beautiful, Black is cool. Black is the center of my understanding, the center of my world and my experience, right? In my house, there are people in afros and hot pants. We playing Pekino. They got Pekino parties. The whole family is gathering in houses, right? When you're not readily welcomed in all of these lounges and stuff. Every weekend we're at a different family's house, or most often at my house. And so I was born into a sense of freedom and understanding myself and my culture. We had Ebony Junior magazine in my house. We had Ebony Encyclopedia. So this is what I was born into. I often say, you look at these guys who have amassed such wealth in the hip hop community, they were born into the same thing, born about my time. So we were lucky to be born into a celebration of Blackness. Right? That's what we were born into. So the older I get, the more you get removed from that, right? And this other journey is the journey to find it. And I believe definitely the students, I was just teaching a class in this earlier today, right? And the greatest academic achievement in Chicago was during the Black Power movement for young people in elementary school and high school, right? When people were being taught about themselves during the Black Power movement. So again, the whole idea that culture and education goes together. If we want people to function at their highest capacity, it is said, Naeem Akbar said, that education begins with an understanding of self. And then it goes outward. So in African-American studies at Chicago State, when I ran that department, we did introduction to African-American studies first, before you take cultural diversity. You get anchored in who are you, and then you, based on that, you learn what other people do, and then you look for similarities and common ground in the other people, in other people's ways, but anchoring yourself in your own first. And so for me, when we talk about, again, Black education and Black culture, and the right to it, we have a right to understand beyond what is being shaped by other narratives and put into books. That's on us, though. It's on ourselves, because everybody censors themselves. So it's no mystery to me that in a Eurocentric school system that they would center themselves. That's what people do. Center themselves. So it's on us to center ourselves, like, again, the generation, the time period I was born into, where people taught you about yourself even outside of the classroom, in your house, and then sent you in to go get some other skills from this other place that you had to be at. But nobody relied on somebody else to tell me who I was. My parents told me that. My aunts and uncles and neighborhood told us that. So we have a right to be educated. We don't have a right to expect other people to do that and do that well.
Yeah.
That's not realistic. That's a fantasy. So we have a right to be educated. We have a responsibility to educate ourselves and to monitor how other people attempt to educate us. We have that's a right. We have a right to spaces and to be allowed into these spaces to help reflect for our children who we are, and reflect for our adults who haven't been properly educated who we are and what we believe. And we have, again, a responsibility to go out to gain that knowledge ourselves beyond the immediate that's given to us. And especially today, listen, in this current climate, there are Black studies departments popping up at all the major white schools. There are Black studies, everything. Black studies is, it's the thing to do right now. It's the money thing to do. And it's so funny to me because we had to fight to keep African-American studies open, but now African-American studies everywhere. But I'm quite concerned, and we are quite concerned about who's leading that. It's not just Black faces, people who understand beyond reach before slavery, people who reach before colonized understanding, and people who respect that tradition and that linkage and that legacy. right? To understand the core concepts and then pass those on. So I should say I retired from professor, took early retirement from professorship in my role of heading that Department of African American Studies at Chicago State to take on the Vice President of Education and Programs at DuSable. And you all, DuSable gets more inquiries than I've ever seen. Everybody taps into DuSable to, and when we were doing this rebranding to Museum and Education Center, the branding company that was handling that did research and said that they found that next to people's personal relationships, like family members and parents, the next trusted source is museums. And so I found that to be very interesting because people think museums are neutral. It's not in fact, that's not so, right? They think museums are just like factual places to go look at artifacts and there's the truth in there, you know? But we know that anytime people create a story, create a narrative, then it's some of the person in the narrative, right? And that's why I went to DuSable full time, because we have a responsibility. The average person who will never go to college, right? The average educator who will never encounter African-centered pedagogy, they might come to a museum, right? Or they might see a Black creative production in a movie, in a film. We co-produced a film at Equiano last year. They might. So we got to use all of these mediums. That's what we have. We have a right to access all of these mediums everywhere, not to downplay people. It's a hard thing for me to convince my contemporaries that the music matters, right? That they like, oh, those rap, no, that matters. The music, because more people are being influenced by music than they are by your classroom. That's a fact. And so we have to use all of these mediums. And so that's what I have to say. We have a right to education, but I want to, for me, my position is I have a responsibility to help to lead that charge in that education. I don't have a right to expect other people to get it right.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's my time, but I think that's a summary of kind of what I would like to say. Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. And I had an opportunity to see your interview on the Breakfast Club and the work that you're doing with Equiano Stories. It was absolutely amazing. We're going to drop a link to that interview in the chat so that folks can see the way that you're building on the Equiano story in a way that this generation can relate. And very, very powerful work coming through the DuSable and through your program for education. So we thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Yes. It's about 8:20. What we're going to do now, we did have two questions, one from Paula and then one from Donna. If you could keep your comments very brief, because then we just want to get into some final points before we close for tonight. And we want to also share contact information so that folks know how to reach us. So I think, Paula, your hand was up first, and then Donna, we'll hear from you.
Actually, Donna's was first.
Donna's was first. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is definitely my audience as a community activist, because much of the work that you all are doing, Dr. Kim, when you're speaking, I know when we were fighting for education to come to the DuSable, because the state Illinois legislator had already passed that African-American history was a mandated thing in the state, but people weren't adhering to that. And it was brought to the DuSable. And it is in that vein that I am speaking to you all as an advocate. One of my colleagues and one of the people that are part of the Gap Girls and Guys Human Rights Consortium is I decided, as I was in the space of academia so much, both as a student, as a parent, as a vendor, as well as a community advocate, I realized that much of what I knew the people who had the power and the research didn't know what I knew to use to get their information out. So I'll say to you all, first of all, you do not have to be invited to the legislative body. It's two things called a witness slip and an expert witness. You can self-identify. Look at anything that is in the area that you want to influence and speak on and sign yourself up. Nobody has to be your barrier or your gatekeeper. In many of the academic institutions and companies that you go to work for, we don't look at their research model, their mission statements, and those MOUs before we sign on. And when we do that or lack of doing that, we shut our own selves out. And we don't realize that. So all of the freedom and the things that you're saying they couldn't do. Dr. Fauci was on my phone. Dr. Redding was on my phone. Jesse Jackson was on my phone. Auntie Maxine, you know why? Because they learned during the pandemic that the people who were in the spaces with the people were the people who could reach the people. The reality of it is we used to keep things local. The more educated we became, the more systemic we became as a group of people. The Neighborhood Research Institute was the beauty shop and the barber shop, the grocery shop, remember. So as you all are researchers and things, it is now time to go back to our communities and start collecting the information from the people, because the people who are authorizing your questions don't want to conflate their research. You are there to expand them. We can't get that twisted. That is money that they're bringing to the institution. Your research, your book is in alignment with something. It is in alignment with their dollars, their connections, and their golf club buddies. So we forget that. What we know when we're at work and we're thinking and we're like, nah, I don't want friends at work. Yeah, they stay at work. We don't understand that is the same thing that have now systemically become our barriers. I get in the doors because I'm not a threat to anybody. People are like, why do they perceive you as not a threat? That's on them. But I'm in the door and I'm gonna say what I have to say, and I'm gonna come back getting what I want to get. And Vickie and Pamela and Jason and so many people know I'm going to ask for what I think is right, and I'm not going to beat you down to get it. However, the freedom does cost. It does cost. However, but don't forget to know how much you're paying up front by reading all of those things they are putting in plain view that you should know about the organizations that you're partnering and collaborating with. And every law and every conversation and committee has to have public input. That's you. Thank you.
You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Donna, for your comments. Much appreciated. We want to make sure that we get Paula and her commentary in. Paula, please share your comments.
Thank you, and thank everyone for their presentations. And I'll try to keep mine short and preface it with Dr. Felder-Small. You said you might have a follow-up event, and I'd be happy to work with you on that, because I want to briefly point out that there's a difference between what we're popular education and what's the truth. And an answer to a lot of the questions that people raise, like you, in terms, why not the ICCP? Why isn't it being implemented? And why don't we have class actions? And I totally agree with the substance. We ought to have a right to education. And for now, I'll limit it to federal law, US constitutional law.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a federal right to education. Nobody does. It's not in the Constitution. And the companion document to the ICCPR, which was civil and political rights, which are the ones that are in the Constitution, and the first 10 amendments, not the main text of the Constitution. The economic covenant on economic, social, cultural rights is where right to education, right to culture, right to a sustainable, the highest sustainable standard of health. Those are all economic, social, cultural rights. The US is in the minority of countries. We haven't even ratified it, let alone have it be law. And in terms of our history of broken treaties, let me remind you, go back to the US Constitution. They wrote out indigenous populations by saying they were nations, uncivilized nations, but nations. Therefore, they wouldn't have any citizenship status. We'll deal with them with treaties, and we know what happened to that trail of broken treaties and the genocide that's still going on, okay? And the only rights in the main text of the Constitution, because they took amendments, okay, to get the civil rights in, were the right to freedom of contract and the right to property. And in the old days when Texas and those folks thought it was politically acceptable, in elementary and secondary textbooks, they told you that what they called the Great Compromise, the main text of the Constitution that they credited for creating the United States of America, was to say that slaves were 3/5 human, but only for the purposes of their slave masters' property rights. So this is consistent with what we started with, and you can't go by this Declaration of Independence, all men, or the preamble, we the people, because even with the first 10 amendments, by the time the states got in, that meant only no women, no slaves, no indigenous, and only white men with property, which is about 10% of the population in the territories of the original 13 colonies. That's the fundamental problem.
Yeah. Well, we will definitely follow up on this, Paula. Thank you so much for those comments. Very, very important. Kim, I do see your hand. So do you have an additional comment?
Yes, I just wanted to add something. You know, as we move through an exercise or life trying to get our rights and realize our rights and change laws, I wanted to point out a couple of things, and that is that there are laws on the books that we don't even use. Somebody mentioned the Amistad legislation. My mentor, Dr. Bartley McSwine, wrote that, and I was the student participant in that. So it's been on the books. You know, there are so many laws on the books that are not enforced and used. I should let you all know that like Brown v. Board, when that was passed, they had to pass a law to say you have to obey the law. This is throughout American history. So it is a worthless attempt for us to expect, first of all, to see ourselves from the outside, right? And look at ourselves through what somebody else says or writes. I understand the importance of law, and we need laws, and we need to, so that we can sue people, you know, and hold them accountable. So that laws are important, but the fundamental change for us and our people comes from us. And it's from inside the way we see ourselves. We have never historically saw ourselves through other people's lenses. Right? Somebody say 3/5 of human. We didn't say that. That don't matter to me. I don't care what that thing says. Nobody cares. We would not be in this conversation if our ancestors believed that. You get what I'm saying? So it's one thing to know the history. We have to know the history. We do have to change the laws. That's a fact. Then, most importantly, we have to know what they are so that we can enforce them. But I think the supreme objective and job, and where we're in trouble now, is when we don't remember ourselves, not how our identity is not shaped by how others write us into their documents. But if we start studying them so much so that we think they're real, and then making them the end and be all, That's where we run. That's where our children run into problems. That's where we run into problems. And then we spin in a circle discussing the minutia of it instead of moving ahead like we know that we're somebody, we know who we are. You get it? So we need people in those roles to do that law stuff. That's what they do. They need our support. But we don't all need to focus ourselves and spin ourselves in a circle on foolish other interpretations of who we are. We know who we are. We need to understand our identity. And some of us need to be in all of these other spaces, carving out resources, right? And making space for ways that we're going to enforce these laws and move our people forward. I just wanted to add that.
Well, thank you. This has been an amazing opportunity. It is more than I ever thought it could be. I continue to be inspired by these brilliant human rights experts. And I want to turn to a couple of closing comments. First of all, if you haven't dropped your contact information in the chat already, please do that, because we will definitely be following up with you. Information about the permanent forum has been posted in the chat. We hope you will register and participate. It's a very, very important opportunity to learn about all the wonderful work that is going on around the world by scholars in just about every discipline you could possibly imagine, in the way that they're bringing their expertise and their racial and cultural vision to that work, and the representation, our identity representation to that work. So we encourage you to participate. In addition to the permanent forum schedule, there are these amazing side events, and that information is available at the link in the chat, where you can find various presentations and conferences that will be taking place. Sheila Walker is premiering a film tomorrow. There is a link to her trailer in the chat. Please support her. We look forward to supporting her tomorrow. So please take a look at that when you get a chance. We've also posted the interview, the Breakfast Club interview, and the Equiano Stories project that Kim Dulaney is working on at the DuSable, representation by the DuSable, and the way that they are telling that story in a brand new way. It's absolutely amazing. So please take a look at that interview and the Equiano Stories project on the DuSable website. Dr. Vickie and Cecile, any closing comments that you'd like to share?
I'm going to defer. I don't know if Justina will be able to show the 1 minute, 30-second trailer, as we exit, but I'll defer in that regard. I am putting a link to the actual screening tomorrow, which is longer. But Dr. Sheila Walker wanted to be here, but she had to be at one of the embassies or something. So, I mean, there's just constant work happening in this lead up to the permanent forum. We will be in New York on the 29th in Harlem at the former Audubon Ballroom for an opening session and so forth, because we can't take our drums up in the UN.
Yes, you can. Why can't we have a recording?
Not without locking me up, girl.
I like that, Cecile.
Speaking of the right, no, hear me, right? Speaking of the right to culture. So anyway,
what's the
Dr.
dress?
Tam, I want to
What's
thank
the dress for that event?
I don't, you know what? I'll give you my email address again, and I'll keep sending this out to everybody, as well as making sure that Dr. Pam and Black Doctorates Matter and everybody else here has as much information as possible. Before we get off, I'm going to try to drop in the link to the, actually you just did that, I think. What you just dropped
I dropped in,
Dr. Pam.
and I'm going to drop in something else.
Right, Dr. Kim? We use the desk. And we just start drumming. And again, my husband does not practice law anymore, so I'm trying to be real careful.
But you see, that's also an indication of the problem that we have, right? So it's like, this is a space that people are supposed to be able to speak about what they need to speak about, but we have to conform to their rules. I'm no longer willing to conform to other people's rules, especially when you have me under these kind of conditions, right? This is ethnocidal,
Exactly.
this is genocidal, and I'm not going to be polite about it. But I do understand that, you know, when you go certain places, you have to behave a certain way. However, we must be firm on what we have to do. And I
I'm
think
just
that
telling you, if
even
y'all
2
hear
minutes,
about some people
you know?
getting pulled over, it's us. It's all of us. So the next wave is gonna have to come after you. Dr. Pam, I just want to thank you as well for stepping out, because as a member of the Trinity Justice Watch team, you said, you know what, I want to learn more about this human rights thing, because I do think that it links to my work. And I think there are many other people who are doing this work and right now don't even know that connection. And so thank you. And everybody else here. I see Dr. Loretta Rags. I'm just gonna say that a lot of people that we invited. This sister was the first NEA, National Education Association. Yeah, I'm gonna tell it. The first higher education educator to ever be named in their 150-year history to ever be named as Educator of the Year. First in the state and then nationally. And so I want to give you those kudos, my sister. Retired from after 20 years of teaching in the city colleges system and founded the Adjunct Union that is still ongoing. So you have, as you wanted to, Dr. Pam, started a conversation that's going to continue, and you've lent it to the human rights work, and we appreciate you. So many more, Dr. Zoe, frankly, so many people in this circle, Queen Ava. I want to thank you. And I'm sorry, Justina, I'm messing up y'all's flow, but if you do get a chance to show that 1 minute, 30 seconds, it is powerful. It shows you what an educator who used to be at Spelman did in her travels with her camera, and then turned it into a documentary. It's 30 minutes, it's incredible. And she's all over the world now with people wanting her to bring it to share.
And can I add one thing?
Yes.
We have all the people we need, right? There's no reason. I was born in Jamaica, and the education I got was just like what somebody was getting in England, in Nigeria, in Barbados, in Trinidad. So why can't we have an African-centered curriculum that all of our people can use globally, right? I say that all these people on this call today, plus the others that we know, we need to create that, right? And we need to that should be part of the finding. We need an African-centered curriculum and approach the things that I learned at the Jacob Carruthers Center, right? And how we should be looking at the world. That needs to be something that all of us learn from we are children to now. And I was so inspired when I heard Kim speak, because Kim is an embodiment of what an African-centered life looks like, from the way her parents raised her, right? And the strength that she has to be anywhere, in any space, because she walks with herself and her ancestors. And so that's what we want. We want Vickies, we want Pams, we want Dr. Felder, we want all these people, myself, who have that strength, because we have a strong sense of who we are. So thank you all.
Yes, spoken as a true certified human rights defender. You see the team, right? We're not playing around. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. We're going to transition now to the trailer. Justina, can we cue that up? Justina, are you there? I think, let me see if I can share the screen. What's the name of the video, Vickie? I'm going to look it up. Is it on YouTube?
I might have it here. Let me see if I can do it. It's Familiar Faces, Unexpected Places. And I can pull it up if I can share my screen quickly. You can Google it, and it's in a lot of different links because she shared it a lot, but she's doing it in all 4 languages tomorrow. This is the 1.5-minute trailer. Forgive me if there's commercials at the beginning, but let me see if I can screen share. And again, thank you for doing this, and to everybody. Yeah, I think I can share. And
okay, awesome.
I'll try to get rid of all this
It's a good chance somebody's trying to hack your website right now. You gotta make sure you're.
Uh-oh, can you hear it?
Yes.
Most of the people who laid the foundations of the modern Americas were of African origin. Of the 6.5 million people who crossed the Atlantic during the first 300 of the 500-year history of the modern Americas, only 1 million came from Europe. 5.5 million people were brought from Africa during the inhuman commerce in human lives known as the transatlantic slave trade. More than 200 million African descendants now live throughout the Americas, some in unexpected places.
Estamos incluidos en lo que es Bolivia.
But the African diaspora does not just exist in the Atlantic world of the Americas. It is global.
We are African Indians.
All right.
Anesthesiologists,
Thank
surgeons,
you, Dr. Vickie.
emergency medicine physicians, pain.
All right, everyone, we are over time. But thank you so much. I appreciate all of the commentary. We will be following up with you and sure to have an additional session very soon. So thank you, and we hope to see you at the permanent forum. Bye, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
So long, wonderful.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, ladies. Amazing, amazing, amazing. This was great. So excited.